Welcome to Wonderful Stories, a place where imagination comes alive. So let's begin.
Part 1, The Son No One Chose. The day Seo-jun was sold off, it rained. Not the dramatic kind, not thunder or lightning, just a steady, quiet drizzle, the kind that soaked into silk sleeves and made everything feel heavier than it already was. Yeon stood in the main hall of the Seo estate, hands folded neatly in front of him. His brothers stood on either side of their father, both dressed sharply in tailored suits, both visibly relieved. They weren't the ones chosen. Be grateful, his father said without looking at him. The Kang Group is the most powerful conglomerate in the country. Even as the last son, you live comfortably. Comfortably. That word always sounded hollow when used on him. Yes, father, Yeon replied softly. Obedient, gentle, harmless. That was the image he had carefully built over the years. His eldest brother snorted quietly. At least you're finally useful for something. Yeon lowered his gaze. He did not argue. He never did. If they believed he was useless, it was because he allowed it. And it kept him safe. The Kang estate was nothing like his family's aging property. It was steel and glass, modern and imposing. Cold, just like its heir. Kang Jae-hyun didn't greet him at the entrance. Instead, Yeon was escorted to a vast living room where the man sat by the window, overlooking the city skyline. Tall, sharp jaw, expression unreadable. Kang Jae-hyun didn't stand when Yeon entered. He barely glanced at him. So this is the son they sent, Jae-hyun said flatly. Yeon bowed slightly. It's an honor to meet you. Silence lingered. Jae-hyun studied him openly, the slim build, the pale complexion, the calm eyes that held no visible ambition. Disappointing. The Kang family had expected one of the Seo sons known for aggressive business tactics. Instead, they received this, quiet thing. This marriage is for appearance only, Jae-hyun said coldly. You will not interfere in company matters. You will attend events when required. Nothing more. Yeon's lips curved faintly. Of course, if Jae-hyun noticed the subtle amusement in his tone, he didn't show it. That night, Yeon sat alone in the large bedroom assigned to him. Once the door locked, his entire demeanor shifted. His back straightened, his eyes sharpened, the softness dissolved. He walked to the desk near the window and opened a hidden compartment inside his luggage. From it, he retrieved a slim encrypted tablet. The screen flickered to life. A secure messaging interface opened automatically. User. Astra. A new message was waiting. Emergency board issue. Han River project collapsing. Need direction. Yeon's fingers moved smoothly across the screen. His mind, calm and razor-focused, analyzed the situation within seconds. The Han River project, a real estate expansion Kang Group had invested billions into, was facing regulatory pushback and stock decline. Without intervention, it would cost them reputation and control. He typed, withdraw publicly, announce strategic restructuring, privately acquire minority opposition shares through subsidiaries, leak environmental improvement plan, market will stabilize in 72 hours. He paused, then added, tell Jae-hyun not to show desperation in tomorrow's press meeting. Send. He leaned back in the chair, eyes thoughtful. Kang Jae-hyun, the man who had just told him not to interfere in company matters. If only he knew. For 5 years, Astra had been the invisible hand guiding Kang Group's most aggressive expansions. The mysterious advisor who never attended meetings. Never revealed a name, only results. And tomorrow, Jae-hyun would follow Astra's advice, like he always did. Without knowing, Astra was sleeping in the room across the hall. Married to him. The next morning, headlines exploded. Kang Group strategic withdrawal stuns. Market. Environmental restructuring plan announced. Stocks dipped sharply at first. Then stabilized. By the afternoon, they began to rise. In the main office, executives stared at the live market data in disbelief. It's recovering. Who predicted this? Kang Jae-hyun stood at the head of the conference table, hands in his pockets. His phone buzzed. A single message from Astra. Told you. 72 hours. Jae-hyun allowed himself the faintest smile. The only person in the world whose intelligence he respected. If Astra hadn't stepped in, one director muttered. Jae-hyun cut him off. We don't rely on luck. We rely on competence. His gaze flickered briefly toward the city skyline. He had searched for Astra's identity for years. Cyber teams, private investigators, digital traces, nothing. The advisor was a ghost. A brilliant one. That evening, Yeon sat at the dining table across from Jae-hyun. Soft lighting, perfectly arranged dishes. You handled the press conference well, Yeon said gently. Jae-hyun looked up, mildly surprised. You watched it. I was curious. Jae-hyun studied him again. There was something about this man that didn't fit the useless son image entirely. But perhaps it was imagination. It was Astra's strategy, Ji-won said. Yi-in tilted his head slightly. You trust this advisor deeply? Yes. No hesitation. Yi-in smiled faintly. I hope one day you meet them. Ji-won's expression hardened slightly. I will. And when he did, he planned to offer Astra a permanent executive position, maybe even more. Trust, power, respect, everything he would never offer this quiet spouse sitting across from him. Yi-in lowered his gaze again, hiding the flicker of emotion in his eyes. How interesting. He was already at Ji-won's side. Yet the man searched for him elsewhere. That night, as rain tapped softly against the glass again, Yi-in stood by the window. His reflection stared back at him, gentle face, calm eyes. They all thought he was weak. They all thought he was disposable. But in the end, he held the one thing that ruled their world. Control. And Kang Jae-hyun had just married it. Part 2, The Advisor He Worships. The first crack in Kang Jae-hyun's certainty appeared 3 days after the Han River recovery. It began with a mistake. Not from Astra, from him. The boardroom was suffocating that afternoon. Senior directors argued over an aggressive overseas acquisition, a semiconductor manufacturer in Singapore that had suddenly become vulnerable due to internal scandal. It's the perfect time to strike, Director Choi insisted. If we move now, we eliminate our competitor's supply chain. It's unstable, another countered. Public backlash could spread. Ji-won listened silently. He had already consulted Astra. The response had come that morning. Do not acquire. Let your rival overpay. 6 months later, purchase their debt instead. Control through liability, not ownership. Clean, efficient, ruthless. But for the first time in 5 years. Ji-won hesitated. Prepare the acquisition proposal, he said finally. The room stilled. It was bold, aggressive, and not what Astra advised. By evening, the media had caught wind of Kang Group's sudden interest. Stock analysts reacted cautiously, and at 10:17 p.m., Ji-won's phone buzzed. Astra? Why did you move? Direct. No greeting. Ji-won stared at the message longer than necessary. He replied, calculated risk. 3 dots appeared instantly. It wasn't calculated. It was emotional. His jaw tightened. Emotional. Explain. The reply came within seconds. You dislike Director Choi. You wanted to prove you didn't rely on my input. Silence filled Ji-won's office. He replayed the board meeting in his mind. The subtle provocation. The suggestion that Kang Group was becoming overly cautious. The way his pride had flared. Damn, another message appeared. A leader who reacts to ego is predictable. The words weren't cruel. They were factual. And that stung more. Ji-won exhaled slowly. Then what do you suggest? Proceed publicly. Quietly prepare contingency for debt acquisition. If rival overextends to compete, we win either way. Even now, Astra cleaned up his mess. Even now, Astra stayed 3 steps ahead. Ji-won leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I need to meet you, he murmured softly. He didn't send that message. But he felt it. For 5 years, Astra had been a voice in the dark. Calm, sharp, unfailingly correct. The only presence in Ji-won's life that felt constant. Reliable. More than the board. More than extended family. More than anyone. And yet he didn't even know if Astra was a man or woman. Old or young. Alone or surrounded. Down the hall, Seo-jun turned off his tablet. His fingers rested lightly on the screen before he closed the secure channel. Ji-won had disobeyed him. Interesting. That was new. Yi-in walked to the window, gaze drifting over the city lights. For 5 years, Kang Jae-hyun had never once ignored his advice. Not until now. Marriage changes dynamics, he thought. Even if Ji-won didn't know why. The next morning, they had breakfast together. Ji-won rarely lingered. Today, he did. You read financial news? Ji-won asked suddenly. Yi-in looked up from his tea. Sometimes. What do you think about the Singapore acquisition? There it was. A test. Yi-in's expression remained mild. It's bold. That's all. A faint smile touched his lips. Bold decisions often expose hidden intentions. Ji-won's eyes sharpened. Hidden intentions? If your rival reacts aggressively, Yi-in continued gently, they may overcommit. Debt is heavier than pride. Silence. The words mirrored Astra's message almost exactly. But that was impossible. Ji-won studied him carefully. Did someone explain this to you? Yi-in blinked softly. Explain what? The innocence was seamless. Too seamless. Ji-won stood abruptly. Forget it. As he walked away, something unsettled twisted in his chest. Coincidence. It had to be. The Singapore deal played out exactly as Astra predicted. Their rival Conglomerate panicked and overbid in an attempt to block Kang Group's influence. 6 weeks later, news broke. Rival Corp struggles with liquidity. Stocks plummeted, debt piled up, and Kang Group quietly began acquiring their liabilities through shell subsidiaries. Control achieved. At the executive celebration dinner, Director Choi raised a glass. To Chairman Kang's foresight, Ji-won didn't smile. He knew the truth. It wasn't foresight, it was Astra. Later that night, alone in his office, he sent a rare message. You were right. A pause. Of course, Astra's confidence never bordered on arrogance. It was simply fact. Ji-won hesitated before typing again. Why stay anonymous? Longer pause this time. Minutes passed. Then, because power is cleanest when it has no face. Ji-won stared at the words. Cleanest when it has no face. He had built his entire reputation on visibility, strength, authority. Astra operated in silence, invisible, untouchable. The idea unsettled him, and intrigued him. That evening, Yeon was in the library when Ji-won entered. He was seated cross-legged on the floor, reading quietly. The lamplight softened his features, casting gold against pale skin. Ji-won stopped at the doorway. For the first time, he really looked. There was something composed about Yeon. Not weak, just restrained. You read economics? Ji-won asked. Yeon looked up, slightly startled. A little. Ji-won approached slowly, glancing at the book in his hands. It was an advanced text on corporate restructuring. Not something a useless son would casually read. You understand this? Ji-won asked. Yeon closed the book gently. I try to. Ji-won crouched in front of him, gaze intense. Why pretend? Yeon's lashes fluttered faintly. Pretend. You're not as ignorant as your family described. A soft laugh escaped him. Being quiet doesn't mean being empty. The words hung between them. Ji-won felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Curiosity. For 5 years, he had searched for Astra. Analyzed patterns. Tried to profile speech styles. Now, sitting inches from his spouse, he felt that same analytical instinct stirring. The cadence. The calm tone. The subtle precision. No, it was impossible. Astra was untouchable. This man, this gentle, soft-spoken husband, couldn't possibly be the shadow strategist who dominated boardrooms without ever stepping inside them. Ji-won stood abruptly. You'll attend the shareholders' gala next week, he said. As my spouse. Yeon nodded. Of course. As Ji-won left, his thoughts were no longer entirely on Astra. And that shift, small, barely noticeable, marked the beginning of something dangerous. Later that night, Yeon opened his encrypted channel again. A message from Ji-won waited. Attend shareholders' gala in person. Yeon stared at the screen. So, the heir wanted Astra visible. Interesting. He typed, observation only, then closed the device. At the gala, Kang Ji-won would stand under chandeliers, surrounded by executives who believed he was the strongest mind in the room. And beside him would stand the useless son they all underestimated. Yeon's lips curved faintly. Let them underestimate. It made the reveal sweeter. Across the mansion, Kang Ji-won lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, Astra's voice wasn't the only one echoing in his mind. Another voice lingered, soft, measured. Debt is heavier than pride. His gaze shifted toward the wall separating their bedrooms. He didn't know why his pulse felt uneven. He didn't know why he suddenly wanted to test something reckless. But one thought wouldn't leave him. What if Astra wasn't as far away as he believed? Part 3. The gala where masks slip. Crystal chandeliers bathed the Grand Aurora Hotel in molten gold. The annual Kang Group shareholders gala was not merely a celebration, it was a battlefield disguised in silken champagne. Investors watched. Rivals circled. Executives performed loyalty with polished smiles. And tonight, Kang Ji-won arrived with his spouse. Whispers followed them the moment they stepped onto the marble floor. That's the Seo family's last son. I heard he's insignificant. A decorative marriage, then. Seo-jun heard every word. He smiled gently, fingers resting lightly against Ji-won's arm. Soft, elegant, unthreatening. Ji-won, dressed in a black tailored suit, radiated composed authority. His presence commanded the room effortlessly. But as they walked further inside, he became aware of something subtle. Yeon's posture had changed, still graceful, but sharper. His gaze wasn't wandering in awe. It was observing, cataloging, calculating. Director Choi approached first, wine glass in hand. Chairman Kang, he greeted smoothly. And, spouse. A faint, dismissive nod toward Yeon. Yeon bowed politely. I hope you're enjoying the evening, Choi said, tone layered with implication. We are, Yian replied before Jiwon could answer. Choi's eyes flickered, mildly surprised that the useless son spoke first. Business gatherings can be overwhelming, Choi added. Yian's smile didn't falter, only when one doesn't understand the conversations. A pause, brief, but sharp. Choi chuckled awkwardly and excused himself. Jiwon glanced sideways at Yian. You didn't need to engage him. I wasn't intimidated. I didn't say you were. Yian's lips curved faintly. You implied it. Jiwon looked away first. The crisis began at 8:47 p.m. An analyst rushed toward Jiwon, pale. Chairman, the Singapore debt acquisition leaked. Jiwon's expression didn't change, but his pulse sharpened. Screens across the ballroom shifted from gala visuals to financial tickers. Breaking news flashed. Kang Group accused of market manipulation. Murmurs exploded through the hall. Investors pulled out phones. Stock prices began dipping in real time. Director Choi appeared again, too quickly. Chairman, he said smoothly, perhaps this was premature strategy. The implication was clear. If the board lost confidence tonight, Jiwon's authority would fracture. Jiwon reached for his phone. No message yet from Astra. Strange. Too strange. Then, his phone buzzed. Astra. Stay calm. Do not deny. Redirect narrative. Relief hit him instantly. How? 3 dots. Gone. Reappeared. Blame transparency. Announce long-term debt stabilization initiative. Offer minority investors first bond access. Turn manipulation into foresight. Jiwon inhaled slowly. It would work. It always worked. But before he could step toward the stage, Yian's fingers lightly touched his sleeve. May I suggest something? Jiwon blinked. What? Yian's gaze remained on the scrolling financial screen. If you frame it as stabilization alone, it looks defensive. Jiwon froze. Those were almost Astra's exact words, but refined. Continue, he said quietly. Announce that Kang Group anticipated industry volatility months ago. Position this as protection, not reaction. Offer bonds, yes, but also reveal that environmental restructuring increased liquidity reserves. Jiwon's eyes sharpened. That information wasn't public. Only executive level knew about the liquidity shift. How do you know that? He asked. Yian tilted his head gently. I read quarterly reports. They weren't published. A beat. The faintest flicker passed through Yian's eyes. Then it was gone. You left them open on your desk. A plausible answer. Yet something inside Jiwon felt unsettled. Across the room, investors grew louder. The dip was accelerating. He had seconds. He stepped onto the stage. The room quieted. Jiwon took the microphone. We are aware of the concerns circulating tonight. Steady voice. Controlled. We anticipated sector instability months ago. Our liquidity reserves were strengthened accordingly. The recent debt acquisition was not manipulation. He paused. It was protection. Murmurs shifted. Phones lowered. We will open first access bonds to minority investors beginning tomorrow. Kang Group does not react to crisis. His gaze swept the room. We prepare for it. Silence. Then applause. Measured at first. Then growing. The stock dip slowed. Stabilized. And within minutes, analysts began reframing headlines. Kang Group anticipates market shift. Strategic protection, not manipulation. Jiwon stepped down from the stage. Director Choi's smile had vanished. In a quiet corridor moments later, Jiwon cornered Yian gently but firmly. How did you know? He asked. Yian met his gaze calmly. Know what? The exact phrasing. Yian blinked slowly. It seemed logical. Logical. That word again. You speak like someone trained in corporate warfare. And you speak like someone unused to being questioned, Yian replied softly. The air between them shifted. Not hostile, charged. For the first time, Jiwon felt something unfamiliar when looking at his spouse. Not obligation, not indifference, awareness. His phone buzzed again. Astra. Well handled. The timing was off. Too late. Astra had sent the detailed strategy earlier. But Yian had already said it aloud. Before Jiwon even checked his phone. Coincidence. Impossible. Unless. No. He pushed the thought away. It was irrational. Astra was untouchable. Untouchable. And yet, as they returned to the ballroom, Jiwon noticed something else. Several executives who once ignored Yian were now watching him differently. Not because they suspected, but because confidence was magnetic. And Yian radiated it, subtly. Dangerously. Later that night, back at the estate, rain began again. Yian removed his cufflinks slowly in the bedroom. His encrypted tablet lay on the desk. A new message from Jiwon. I want to meet you. Yian's fingers stilled. So, it had finally reached that point. For 5 years, Astra had remained a ghost. But tonight had shaken something. He typed carefully. Not yet. Send. Across the hall, Ji-won stared at the response. Not yet. Why not? What was Astra afraid of? Or, what was Astra protecting? His mind replayed the gala. Yeon's voice. Yeon's composure. The way he had stepped forward without hesitation. His gaze slowly shifted toward the wall separating their rooms again. His pulse was no longer steady. For the first time since the marriage began, Kang Jae-hyun felt uncertain. And he hated uncertainty. But he hated something else more. The possibility that he had been blind. Standing by his window, Yeon watched the city lights shimmer under rain. The gala had accelerated things. Faster than he intended. Ji-won was too perceptive, too disciplined. If he kept drawing parallels, the reveal would not be his choice. And Yeon did not like losing control. His reflection stared back at him. Gentle face, soft eyes, a mask perfected over years. But behind it lived Astra. The strategist, the shadow, the power Ji-won worshipped without knowing. Yeon smiled faintly. If Ji-won continued searching for Astra, he might find him closer than he ever imagined. And when that happened, the balance between them would shatter. Part 4, the night he tested him. Kang Jae-hyun did not believe in coincidences. Not in business, not in strategy, and certainly not in patterns. Patterns meant design, and design meant intent. For 3 nights after the gala, he replayed everything in his mind, the phrasing, the timing, the calm precision in Seo-jun's voice. The way he had spoken before Astra's message even arrived. It was too aligned, too seamless, and Kang Jae-hyun was not a man who ignored anomalies. So he decided to create one. The trap was simple, subtle, and cruel. At 7:30 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday, Ji-won deliberately left a confidential file open on his office desk, visible, but not obvious. Inside the folder, falsified projections. A strategic miscalculation embedded intentionally within market expansion data. If followed, it would cause a controlled but noticeable loss. Not enough to destroy the company. Enough to reveal whoever interfered. He closed his laptop, left the room unlocked, and walked downstairs where Yeon sat reading in the lounge. Working late? Yeon asked gently. Always, Ji-won replied. He studied him carefully. Yeon looked up with mild curiosity. No tension, no wariness, just that same soft expression. Don't stay up too late, Yeon added quietly. The concern sounded real. That bothered him more than it should have. At 11:42 p.m., Ji-won received a message. Astra, your energy division expansion model is flawed. His pulse spiked. Hook set. Explain. 3 dots appeared immediately. Third quarter regulatory incentives were reduced last month. Your projected margins ignore that adjustment. Exactly the falsified detail. Ji-won's jaw tightened. And, withdraw proposal. Redirect capital into logistics automation. Higher return. Lower scrutiny. He stared at the screen. It was precise. It was correct. It was Astra. But the file had never been sent through official channels. Only one place it existed. His desk. In his private office. Inside his home. Where only. No. He typed. How did you access the updated model? A longer pause this time. Then, I have my methods. His chest felt tight, calculated, deflective, controlled. It could still be coincidence. He needed confirmation. The next morning at breakfast, he set the stage. I'm expanding the energy division, Ji-won said casually. Yeon poured tea. That's ambitious. It will increase margins. A slight pause. Unless regulatory incentives were reduced, Yeon said gently. Ji-won's hand froze mid-motion. He looked up slowly. What? Yeon blinked as if surprised by his own words. I thought I read something about that last month. Where? News, perhaps. The lie was smooth. Too smooth. You're certain? Ji-won pressed. Yeon's gaze met his steadily. If margins are based on outdated incentives, the risk increases. Silence stretched between them. Ji-won felt it clearly now. Not coincidence. Not intuition. Synchronization. His pulse pounded in his ears. Across the table sat the man the world dismissed as useless. And yet, every instinct screamed that he was sitting across from something far more dangerous. That evening, Ji-won escalated. He invited Yeon into his office. Sit, he said calmly. Yeon obeyed. Ji-won placed 2 printed documents on the desk. One was the flawed model. The other, the corrected one Astra had suggested. Which would you choose? Ji-won asked. Yeon glanced down. His eyes scanned the numbers. Calmly, quickly, too quickly for someone inexperienced. This one, Yeon said, tapping the corrected model. Why? Because it doesn't bleed. Ji-won's breath caught. That phrase. Astra had used it once before in a message 2 years ago. Never choose strategies that bleed slowly. They weaken perception. Ji-won stood abruptly. Who are you? He demanded. Yian looked up, startled. But only slightly. I'm your spouse. That's not what I mean. The air felt electric, charged. Ji-won stepped closer. Every time Astra messages me, you speak first. Yian's lashes lowered. I don't know what you're implying. You knew about regulatory incentives before I said anything. You left reports open. That file was private. A beat. A single beat. And in that sliver of silence, Yian did not deny it. He simply looked at him. Not softly, not innocently, but steadily. The shift was microscopic, yet undeniable. Ji-won's heart slammed against his ribs. Say it, just say it. But Yian only asked gently, why does it matter so much? Because Astra is the reason Kang Group survives. His voice cracked slightly with intensity. Astra is the only person who has never failed me. The words hung between them. Yian's expression changed, just barely. Something vulnerable flickered there. Never failed you, he repeated quietly. Yes, even when you disobeyed. Ji-won froze. That was something only Astra would know. How do you know that? He whispered. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Yian stood slowly. For a moment, he looked fragile again. Then, he didn't. His posture straightened. His gaze sharpened. And the softness drained from his expression like mist evaporating under sun. When he spoke next, his voice was no longer gentle. It was precise, measured, familiar. You should not test the person protecting your empire, Kang Jae-hyun. The world stopped. His pulse roared in his ears. He knew that tone. He had heard it through encrypted messages for 5 years. Calm, controlled, unyielding. Astra, he breathed. Yian didn't smile, didn't deny it, didn't confirm it outright, but the silence was answer enough. Ji-won staggered back half a step. No, he whispered. That's not possible. Why? Yian asked quietly. Because I look weak. Ji-won couldn't speak. Images flooded his mind. The gala, the breakfast conversation, the regulatory correction, the flawless timing. 5 years. 5 years of searching. 5 years of trusting a ghost. And he had married him. Shared a roof. Sat across from him every morning. I worshipped you, Ji-won said hoarsely. Yian's gaze softened, just slightly. I know, and you let me. Yes. The honesty hit harder than denial would have. Ji-won's chest tightened painfully. Why stay silent? Because power without visibility is safer. The same words Astra had sent him. Cleanest when it has no face. Ji-won laughed once, breathless, disbelieving. You let them call you useless. Yes, you let me believe you were nothing. A flicker of hurt passed through Yian's eyes. You never asked who I was. Silence fell like a blade between them. Ji-won had assumed, judged, dismissed, all while trusting the mind standing in front of him more than anyone else in the world. His knees felt weak. You're my husband, he said faintly. And your advisor, Yian replied calmly. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Ji-won realized it with terrifying clarity. All this time, he thought he stood above Yian. But the truth was that Kang Group stood because of him. And now Ji-won faced a reality more dangerous than corporate warfare. He had married the one person capable of dismantling him. Or saving him. Yian stepped closer. Not threatening, not triumphant, just steady. I never betrayed you, he said quietly. Every decision I made was to protect Kang Group. To protect me? Ji-won asked. A long pause. Yes. The word was soft, but it shattered something inside him. For the first time in his life, Kang Jae-hyun did not know whether he felt fear. Or something far more dangerous. Part 5, The Heir Who Fell First. Kang Jae-hyun did not sleep that night. He remained in his office long after Yian left, staring at the closed door as if it might reopen and undo everything that had just happened. Astra, Seo-jun, his spouse, the man he had dismissed as decoration, the strategist he had trusted above all others. The realization felt less like discovery and more like impact. A collision of identity and pride. For 5 years, Astra had been his equal, no, his superior in foresight. The only voice that challenged him without fear. The only mind he respected without reservation. And now that voice had a face. A soft one, a familiar one he had ignored. Across the hall, Yian stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker below. He had not planned for the reveal to happen like this. He had intended control, timing, leverage. Instead, it had come through confrontation. Through emotion. That alone unsettled him. He had always remained composed. Strategic. Detached. But tonight, when Ji-won said, I worshipped you, something in his chest had shifted. That had not been part of the plan. Morning came quietly. They met at breakfast again. The air felt different, not tense, not hostile, but aware. Ji-won studied him openly now. No dismissal, no indifference, just intensity. You could have taken over, Ji-won said finally. Yi-in looked up from his tea. Kang Group could have been yours without marriage. Without exposure. Yes. Why didn't you? Yi-in set the cup down carefully. Because I didn't want it. The simplicity of the answer startled him. You build my empire from shadows, Ji-won pressed. Why stay there? Yi-in's gaze met his. Because it was never about ownership. Then what was it about? A pause. And for the first time since the reveal, Yi-in looked uncertain. You, he said quietly. The word struck harder than any accusation could have. Ji-won's heartbeat faltered. Explain. You were reckless when you were younger, Yi-in said calmly. Ambitious. Brilliant. But reactive. Ji-won frowned slightly. I watched you from a distance. That sentence lingered. Why? Ji-won asked. Yi-in's eyes softened faintly. Because I saw someone trying to carry a kingdom alone. Silence fell. You don't know me, Ji-won said, though his voice lacked conviction. I know you better than anyone, Yi-in replied gently. I know when you're angry but pretending not to be. I know you pace when anxious. I know you hate losing more than you love winning. Each statement was accurate, uncomfortably accurate. You analyzed me, Ji-won muttered. Yes, like a project. Yi-in's jaw tightened slightly. No. Then what? Another silence. This one heavier. Like someone I cared about, Yi-in admitted. The air seemed to thin. Ji-won felt heat rise unexpectedly to his face. You cared about a man you'd never met. I met you long before you knew I existed. That made him look up sharply. What does that mean? Yi-in hesitated, then spoke. 5 years ago, at the Global Finance Forum. You gave a speech. Ji-won blinked. That event had been pivotal. He had been younger. Unproven. I remember, he said slowly. You said leadership isn't about control, Yi-in continued. It's about responsibility. Ji-won stiffened. I believed you, Yi-in added quietly. A strange ache settled in Ji-won's chest. You believed me, he echoed. Yes, and you decided to, what? Guide me, protect the company you were building. That's not an answer. Yi-in's fingers tightened slightly against the table. I didn't want you to fail. The honesty was disarming. Not strategic, not calculated, just real. Ji-won leaned back in his chair. You've been beside me for years, he murmured. And I didn't see you. You weren't meant to. That doesn't make it better. Yi-in looked down. No, it doesn't. The shift began subtly. Ji-won stopped addressing Astra through encrypted channels. Instead, he began walking across the hall. If he had a question, he asked Yi-in directly. At first, it felt unnatural. Disorienting. Energy sector expansion, Ji-won said that afternoon, entering Yi-in's room without knocking. Yi-in glanced up from his tablet. Yes. Is it still viable next quarter? Yi-in considered briefly. If regulatory relief passes. Otherwise delay. No dramatic reveal. No digital disguise. Just conversation. Face to face. It changed something. But pride did not disappear so easily. That evening, Ji-won stood in the study alone. You let me look like a fool, he said quietly when Yi-in entered. Yi-in stopped. I never intended that. I praised Astra in front of you. Compared you to someone I didn't know. Yi-in's gaze softened. I wasn't jealous. That's not the point. What is the point? Ji-won turned toward him fully. The point is I didn't see you. The vulnerability in his voice surprised even him. I dismissed you. Yes, Yi-in said calmly. The agreement stung. You're not angry? Ji-won asked. Yi-in paused. I was, he admitted. When? The first week of our marriage. Ji-won frowned. You told me not to interfere. I didn't know. I know, Yi-in interrupted gently. That's why I let it go. The quiet strength in that sentence unsettled him. You're stronger than you look, Ji-won said softly. Yi-in's lips curved faintly. I know. That almost made Ji-won laugh. Instead, he stepped closer. The space between them felt charged. Different than before. Not political. Not strategic. Personal. You said you protected Kang Group for me, Ji-won said. Yes. Why continue after the marriage? Yi-in met his gaze steadily. Because my reason didn't change. Ji-won's breath slowed. And what is that reason? Silence. But this time, it wasn't evasive. It was careful. Measured. You, Yi-in repeated. Something inside Ji-won finally broke through pride. 5 years. 5 years of admiration directed at a faceless mind. 5 years of trusting Astra more than anyone. And Astra had been. This man, standing inches away, watching him not as a project, but as someone worth protecting. You should have told me, Ji-won said hoarsely. I wasn't ready. For what? For you to look at me like that. Like what? Like you are now. Ji-won didn't realize he had stepped closer until their hands almost touched. How am I looking at you? He asked quietly. Yi-in swallowed faintly. Like I matter. The confession hit harder than any corporate betrayal. You've always mattered, Ji-won said instinctively. That's not true. The words were gentle, but firm. Ji-won exhaled slowly. You're right, he admitted. He had admired Astra, respected Astra, relied on Astra, but he had not extended that same regard to the man beside him. Until now, and the realization was devastating. You fell for a voice, Yi-in said softly. Ji-won's gaze didn't waver. No, he stepped forward fully now. I fell for the mind behind it. A beat, and the man standing in front of me. Yi-in's breath caught. The mask didn't fall completely, but it cracked. For the first time, Astra looked uncertain. And that was something no one else had ever witnessed. Ji-won reached out slowly, not commanding, not claiming, just offering. If I had known, he said quietly, I would have chosen you. Yi-in's voice was barely above a whisper. You did. The words settled between them. Heavy, true. Ji-won realized then, he had already chosen Astra years ago. Trusted him, built his empire with him, shared victories with him. He just hadn't known his name. Now he did, and the knowledge felt less like shock, and more like inevitability. He moved closer still, not enough to touch, but enough that distance no longer existed. I think, Ji-won said quietly, I fell first. Yi-in's composure faltered completely at that. A soft, disbelieving exhale left him. You didn't even know me. I knew enough. Their eyes locked. Not strategist and heir, not shadow and throne, just two men standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than corporate war. Trust. Part 6. When the board found out. The leak happened on a Monday. It was subtle at first, a financial blog referencing an anonymous strategist, rumored to be the true architect behind Kang Group's most profitable decisions. By noon, major outlets picked it up. By evening, the board demanded an emergency meeting. Kang Group's success over the last 5 years appears linked to a hidden advisor known only as Astra. The headline glowed across the conference screen. Ji-won stood at the head of the long obsidian table, expression controlled. Inside, he was already calculating damage. Director Choi folded his hands. Is this true? Silence. Ji-won didn't deny it. That depends on your definition of advisor, he replied calmly. Do we have an unseen individual influencing company direction? Another director pressed. Yes. Murmurs filled the room. Choi's gaze sharpened. Without board approval, strategic consultations fall under executive discretion, Ji-won said smoothly. That is not the concern. Of course it wasn't. The concern was power. If Astra existed, then influence existed beyond the board's reach. And men like Choi did not tolerate unseen leverage. Reveal the identity, Choi said firmly. Immediately, the words hit like a blade. Across town, in the estate's private office, Yi-in watched the live financial commentary quietly. He had expected this. Patterns always emerged. 5 years of flawless strategy. Too flawless. It had been inevitable someone would trace the anomaly. The only variable he hadn't accounted for was timing. He picked up his secure tablet. There was no need for encryption now. He simply walked down the hall. The boardroom atmosphere thickened. We cannot allow an invisible figure to influence corporate governance, Choi insisted. Ji-won's gaze remained cold. You allowed results. That influence already exists. Then formalize it. Name them. No, Ji-won said. The refusal was immediate, sharp. The room stilled. This is not a suggestion, Chairman Kang. It is not a negotiation either. Director Choi leaned forward. Unless there is something inappropriate about this advisor's identity. A test. A trap. Ji-won didn't blink. There is nothing inappropriate about competence. But secrecy implies liability. That word lingered. Liability. The door opened quietly. Every head turned. Seo-jun stepped inside. He wore a simple charcoal suit. Not flashy. Not submissive. Just composed. This is a private board session, Choi snapped. Yi-in bowed slightly. I'm aware. Ji-won's pulse spiked. He hadn't summoned him. Yi-in walked calmly toward the end of the table. He didn't sit. I believe you're discussing Astra. Silence fell like concrete. Director Choi's eyes narrowed. And how would you know that? Yi-in met his gaze steadily. Because I am Astra. The world shifted. The air left the room in a collective breath. Choi stared at him as if he'd misheard. That is absurd. Is it? Yi-in replied calmly. Ji-won didn't move, didn't interrupt. He watched. Because this was no longer about protection. It was about choice. Yi-in continued. The Han River withdrawal. The Singapore debt acquisition. The logistics automation pivot. The environmental restructuring before regulatory shift. He looked around the table. Would you like timestamps? Silence. Director Han, who rarely spoke, leaned forward slowly. You expect us to believe, you. Yian's gaze didn't waver. You don't have to believe me. He turned toward the main screen. Open archived executive emails from 5 years ago. Search encrypted contact key AST01. Ji-won didn't hesitate. He tapped commands into the table console. The archives appeared. Encrypted signature. Timestamped. 5 years. Director Choi's face paled slightly. This proves nothing, he insisted. Yian tilted his head slightly. Director Choi, your offshore subsidiary acquisition in 2022 would have collapsed without my intervention. The room stiffened. You advised against it, I corrected your projection error in person, Yian continued softly. You never realized the mistake was yours. Choi's jaw tightened. No one else in the room had known that. Not even Ji-won. Yian's voice remained calm. I never sought credit. I sought stability. Director Han looked at Ji-won slowly. You knew. Yes, Ji-won replied. And you allowed this. Yes. The simplicity stunned them more than denial would have. Choi stood abruptly. This is reckless. No, Ji-won said, voice cold now. Reckless would be losing 5 years of strategic advantage because your pride is wounded. The boardroom fell silent. Power had shifted. Not subtly. Not quietly. Openly. Yian stepped forward slightly. If my identity is the concern, then remove me formally. He placed a slim folder on the table. Inside were 5-year growth charts. Profit margins. Crisis prevention metrics. All signed digitally. Astra. If you believe Kang Group performs better without me, Yian continued evenly, I will step down. The confidence was not arrogance. It was certainty. He knew the numbers. He knew the board. And he knew fear. Because what frightened them was not secrecy. It was dependence. Director Han exhaled slowly. Without Astra, he said quietly, we lose predictive advantage. Silence. Director Choi remained standing. But he did not argue again. He understood. Removing Astra would destabilize the company. And shareholders would not forgive that. The board's decision came swiftly. Astra will be formally recognized as strategic director. Murmurs followed. Yian inclined his head slightly. Under one condition, Director Han added. Transparency with the board. Yian nodded. Agreed. The vote passed. Unanimous, though not all willingly. The meeting adjourned. Executives filed out quietly. Director Choi lingered briefly. He looked at Yian, not dismissively now, but carefully. You hid well, he muttered. Yian met his gaze. You never looked. Choi left without replying. When the room emptied, only Ji-won and Yian remained. Silence lingered between them. You didn't need to reveal yourself, Ji-won said quietly. Yes, I did. Why? Yian's gaze softened faintly. Because I won't be used as leverage against you. The words settled deep. Ji-won stepped closer. You chose exposure. Yes. For me. A small pause. Yes. The weight of that settled heavily in Ji-won's chest. You gave up invisibility, he said. I was never afraid of being seen. Then what were you afraid of? Yian held his gaze. Being underestimated by you. The honesty cut deeper than anything else that day. Ji-won exhaled slowly. You're not underestimated anymore. Yian's lips curved faintly. I know. For the first time, there was no mask between them. No shadow. No encrypted distance. Just two men standing in the open. Equal. Ji-won reached for his hand. This time, Yian didn't hesitate. Outside, the headlines began shifting. Kang Group's secret strategist revealed. Conglomerate heir's spouse as corporate architect. The world buzzed, speculated, reacted. But inside the boardroom, something far more important had happened. The shadow had stepped into light. Not forced, not exposed, chosen. And Kang Ji-won realized something profound. He had once worshipped Astra. Now, he stood beside him. Part 7, The Enemies Who Strike Back. Power did not forgive exposure. Within 48 hours of Astra's identity becoming public, Kang Group's stock experienced its first true volatility in years. Not collapse, not yet, but tremors. Media outlets framed it as romantic intrigue at first. The heir and the hidden genius. But competitors saw something else. Opportunity. The attack came quietly. A foreign investment consortium began aggressively acquiring Kang Group shares through layered subsidiaries. At first, it looked like diversification. Then patterns emerged. Consolidation. Control percentages rising. Someone was building leverage. Hostile leverage. In the executive war room, screens glowed with live acquisition data. Ji-won's expression was ice. They're targeting voting shares, Director Han said sharply. Through shell entities, another executive added. Yian stood beside Ji-won, not behind him, not hidden. For the first time, he occupied his position openly, strategic director. But visibility changed dynamics. You expected retaliation, Ji-won said quietly to him. Yes. From who? Director Choi's external allies. As if summoned by name, Choi entered the room. He did not look surprised. Chairman, he said smoothly. I assume you've noticed the market activity. You're connected, Ji-won stated flatly. Choi's smile didn't falter. I have always advocated for transparency. Don't insult us. Choi folded his hands. Your spouse's sudden elevation destabilized investor confidence. No, Yian said calmly. It destabilized your influence. The temperature in the room dropped. Choi's eyes sharpened. You are inexperienced in corporate warfare, he said coldly. I am corporate warfare, Yian replied. Silence. The truth of that statement hung heavy. Choi didn't argue. He simply left. And that confirmed everything. By midnight, the numbers were undeniable. If the acquisition pace continued, the consortium would hold enough voting power within 10 days to force board restructuring. A legal takeover. Clean. Devastating. Ji-won stared at the projections. We counter-acquire, he said. Yian shook his head slightly. No, why not? Because that's what they want. Ji-won's jaw tightened. Explain. They're baiting us into draining liquidity. Yian moved closer to the central display. If we buy aggressively, we weaken cash reserves. And they trigger regulatory scrutiny on our sudden capital movement. Ji-won understood instantly. A double trap. Financial strain plus investigation. He looked at Yian. What do you suggest? Yian's gaze sharpened. We don't defend. We attack. The next morning, Kang Group announced something unexpected. A full merger discussion with a mid-sized renewable energy firm. Market analysts reacted with confusion. What is Kang Group doing? But Yian's strategy wasn't about energy. It was about distraction. The merger required shareholder approval. That meant a vote, and votes meant public alignment. Yian knew exactly how to frame it. At the press conference, he stood beside Ji-won. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. This merger represents future sustainability, Yian said calmly. But more importantly, it reinforces shareholder empowerment. He looked directly into the cameras. Every voting share matters. The message was subtle, but precise. It alerted minority shareholders, mobilized them, reminded them that voting rights were power. Within hours, retail investors began rallying. Social media exploded. Protect Kang Group. Don't let foreign takeover happen. The consortium's quiet accumulation was no longer quiet. Public scrutiny followed, and scrutiny slowed acquisition, but retaliation escalated. 3 nights later, Yian's car was forced off the road. Not violently, not enough to cause severe injury, but enough to send a message. He walked away with a bruised shoulder. Ji-won did not. He arrived at the scene minutes later, fury barely contained. Who did this? He demanded. Yian remained calm, even seated against the ambulance door. They're escalating pressure. I will destroy them. No, Yian said firmly. Ji-won froze. This is emotional. They attacked you. They're provoking you. Ji-won knelt in front of him. For the first time since the reveal, fear flickered openly in his eyes. You could have been killed. I wasn't. That's not the point. Yian reached out, gripping his wrist. Grounding him. If you retaliate recklessly, they win. Ji-won's breathing was uneven. They targeted you as my weakness. Yian held his gaze steadily. Then stop treating me like one. The words cut through the fury. Ji-won stilled. You think I see you as weak? You're afraid for me. Yes. Fear clouds judgment. Silence. Yian's voice softened slightly. I don't need protection from you. I need partnership. The distinction mattered. Ji-won exhaled slowly. You were invisible for 5 years. And now I'm not. You're exposed. And still standing. The calm confidence in him stabilized the storm inside Ji-won. He nodded once. Then we end this strategically. Yian's lips curved faintly. Good. The counterattack came in silence. Instead of buying back shares, Kang Group triggered a regulatory audit, not on themselves. On the consortium, anonymous financial irregularities surfaced. Shell subsidiaries linked to tax evasion. Foreign influence violations. Nothing illegal enough for arrest. But enough for freeze orders. Trading slowed. Acquisitions halted. The consortium retreated. Director Choi resigned within the week. Officially for health reasons. Unofficially, checkmate. The boardroom felt different afterward. Not tense. Not doubtful. Certain. Yian stood at the head of the strategy table now, beside Ji-won, not below. No one questioned his presence. No one dismissed him. Respect had replaced suspicion. Later that night, back at the estate, quiet returned. Yi-an stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Ji-won approached from behind. You should rest, he said softly. I will. A pause. You scared me, Ji-won admitted. Yi-an didn't turn. I know. I thought I lost you before I even. He stopped. Before I even what? Yi-an glanced over his shoulder. Before you even what? Ji-won stepped closer. Before I figured out how much you matter. The vulnerability in his voice was no longer guarded. Yi-an faced him fully. I've always been here, he said quietly. I know. Ji-won reached up, brushing his fingers lightly against the bruise on Yi-an's shoulder. The touch was careful, protective, but not possessive. You're not my weakness, Ji-won said. You're my advantage. Yi-an's composure softened. Good answer. A faint smile. Then silence. Comfortable this time. The war had shifted something between them. Not just in power. In trust. Ji-won no longer saw Astra as a distant strategist. And he no longer saw Yi-an as fragile. He saw one person, and that realization settled deeper than corporate victory ever had. Part 8. The marriage that becomes real. The mansion felt different after the takeover attempt. Not quieter. Not calmer. Just. Lived in. For months, the estate had been divided into territories. Ji-won's office, Yi-an's room, shared spaces used with polite distance. Now, lines blurred. Doors remained open. Lights stayed on later. Conversations lingered. It began with something simple. Move your things, Ji-won said one evening. Yi-an looked up from his tablet. Where? To my room. A pause. That's sudden. Ji-won crossed his arms. We're married. We were married before. That was political. And now? Ji-won held his gaze steadily. Now it's real. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just heavy with implication. Yi-an studied him carefully. You're certain? He asked quietly. I don't make impulsive decisions. A faint smile touched Yi-an's lips. That's debatable. Ji-won stepped closer. I want you beside me. Not as strategist. Not as leverage. Not as shield. Beside. Yi-an stood slowly. You're not doing this because you feel responsible, he said carefully. No. Not because you think I need protection. No. Then why? Ji-won exhaled softly. Because when that car hit yours, I realized something. Yi-an's expression shifted slightly. I wasn't thinking about the company. Silence. I was thinking about losing you. The honesty landed gently, but it shook something loose. Yi-an had prepared for corporate betrayal. For boardroom manipulation. For calculated power plays. He had not prepared for this. He nodded once. Then I'll move. The adjustment was subtle. Two wardrobes merged. Two routines intertwined. But it wasn't seamless. They were both used to control. To independence. To leading without compromise. On the third night of sharing the same room, they argued. You can't keep working until 3 in the morning, Ji-won said sharply. I've done it for 5 years. You weren't exposed for 5 years. Yi-an closed his tablet calmly. You're overreacting. I'm being cautious. You're hovering. The word hung in the air. Ji-won stiffened. I'm not. You are. Yi-an's voice remained even. You check security twice before bed. You monitor my schedule. You canceled 2 external meetings without asking me. Ji-won's jaw tightened. They were unnecessary. They were mine. Silence. Control. It was slipping. Not in the company. In here. You think I can't handle myself, Yi-an said quietly. I know you can, Ji-won replied instantly. Then trust me too. That stilled him. Trust. Ji-won had trusted Astra blindly for 5 years. But loving someone in the open was different than trusting a voice in the dark. It meant vulnerability, exposure, fear. He exhaled slowly. I don't know how to separate risk assessment from personal attachment, he admitted. Yi-an's expression softened. You don't have to. Ji-won frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means you can care, Yi-an said gently. Just don't cage me. The words were calm, but firm. Ji-won studied him. You've never needed protection. No, even when your family treated you like you were disposable. Yi-an's gaze shifted slightly. That topic rarely surfaced. They underestimated me, he said simply. That's not the same. It was useful. For them, Ji-won said quietly. Yi-an didn't reply, and that silence said enough. A week later, the past knocked. Literally. Seo chairman arrived unannounced. Yi-an's father. Ji-won met him in the main hall. Cold politeness wrapped in tailored arrogance. I'd like to speak with my son, the chairman said. Yi-an appeared moments later, composed. Yes, father. The older man's gaze swept over him. So the rumors are true. Yi-an didn't respond. You hid quite well, his father continued. I learned from you, Yi-an replied. Calmly. Ji-won's eyes flickered slightly. The chairman ignored him. You embarrassed the family. By succeeding, Yi-an asked mildly. By deceiving us, Yian tilted his head. You never asked. The room stilled. Ji-won watched closely. This was not corporate war. This was personal. You were given away because you were worthless, the chairman said sharply. And now, Yian replied evenly, you want association. The accusation was clean, accurate. The chairman's jaw tightened. Kang Group's rise is impressive, he said. A partnership between families could. No, Ji-won interrupted. The single word carried authority. This marriage is not a bargaining chip. The chairman's gaze sharpened. You forget how alliances work. I don't, Ji-won said calmly. I simply choose mine. Yian felt something shift in his chest. Subtle, but profound. The chairman looked between them. You've changed, he said to Yian. No, Yian replied softly. I stopped pretending. Silence fell heavy. The older man finally turned to leave. But at the doorway, he paused. You could have led Seo Group. Yian didn't hesitate. I chose not to. The door closed, and with it, something old dissolved. Later that night, Yian stood alone in the garden. Ji-won joined him quietly. You didn't tell me he'd come, Ji-won said. I didn't know. A pause. Are you all right? Yian considered the question carefully. Yes. Do you regret it? Regret what? Not taking control of your family's company. Yian looked up at the night sky. No. Why? Because I didn't want power for its own sake. Ji-won stepped closer. Then what do you want? Yian glanced at him. You already know. Ji-won did. He just needed to hear it. I want to build something with someone who sees me, Yian said quietly. The words were simple, but they held more weight than any merger contract. Ji-won reached for his hand. No hesitation now. I see you, he said. Not Astra, not Strategist, not Shield, Yian. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ji-won added softly, and I don't want this to be a strategic alliance anymore. Yian's pulse skipped faintly. It hasn't been for a while. A small, genuine smile appeared. The first one without calculation. Without masks. The first one that belonged only to them. That night, there were no encrypted messages. No board calls. No financial projections. Just quiet conversation in shared space. Shoulders brushing. Hands lingering. Walls lowering one careful layer at a time. The political marriage had begun as transaction. It had become revelation. Now, it was something else entirely. Choice. But as Yian drifted toward sleep, one thought lingered. There was one final secret he had not shared. Not corporate. Not strategic. Personal. Something from before Astra. Before Kang Group. Before Ji-won ever gave that speech 5 years ago. And secrets, no matter how carefully kept, had a way of surfacing. Part 9. The Fall of the Mask. The boardroom of Hanseong Group had never felt so small. Not when shareholders screamed during economic crashes. Not when hostile takeovers threatened to swallow subsidiaries whole. But today, as directors sat frozen around the obsidian conference table, silence weighed heavier than panic ever had. At the head of the table stood Kang Jae-hyun. And beside him, calm, composed, untouchable, stood Seo-jun. Not as his husband, not as the useless last son, but as the strategist who had shaped Hanseong Group's survival for 3 years under the alias, Astra. The projector behind them glowed with undeniable proof. Encrypted emails, strategic reports, board recommendations signed with Astra's cipher. Every document traced back to a single origin. Seo-jun. Chairman Kang's face had lost all color. You, he rasped. You were in my house. In my company. Pretending to be nothing. Seo-jun met his gaze without hostility. Without fear. I was hired as a consultant before the marriage was arranged, he said evenly. My identity was confidential. You approved the contract yourself. The chairman's hand trembled. Jae-hyun's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You wanted to expose Astra, he said quietly. Now you have. A murmur spread through the board. Some directors looked stunned. Others looked impressed. Director Min leaned forward. All major recoveries in the last 3 years, the semiconductor pivot, the foreign capital defense strategy, the logistics restructuring. He exhaled slowly. That was him. Seo-jun inclined his head once. Yes. A long silence followed. Then, one of the senior shareholders stood. If what we're seeing is true, she said carefully, then the most valuable mind in this company has been standing in our chairman's home as a political pawn. Her gaze sharpened. Why? The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious. Seo-jun answered simply. Because my father needed protection. Because Hanseong needed stability. And because Chairman Kang would never have listened to someone without the right surname. The chairman slammed his palm onto the table. You manipulated us. No. Seo-jun corrected calmly. I advised you. Every decision was yours. The room grew still again. The truth was unavoidable. Astra had never forced them, only guided, and every time they followed that guidance, they profited. Jae-hyun stepped forward then. His presence shifted the atmosphere entirely. My husband, he said deliberately, saved this company from collapse twice. The word husband echoed differently now. Not fragile, not decorative, powerful. Chairman Kang looked between them, fury and dawning realization warring in his expression. You knew, he demanded. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. I suspected, he said. I confirmed it myself, and you kept it from me. Yes, the single word landed like a verdict. For the first time in his life, Chairman Kang had lost control of the narrative. Director Min cleared his throat. There is a more pressing matter, he said cautiously. The evidence presented earlier today regarding offshore fund manipulation. He looked pointedly at the chairman. Seo-jun didn't move, he didn't gloat, but he didn't shield the man either. Jae-hyun spoke instead. The internal audit will proceed. Gasps followed. Chairman Kang's head snapped toward him. You would investigate your own father. Jae-hyun didn't flinch. I would protect the company. The chairman laughed bitterly. This is because of him. Jae-hyun's expression hardened. No, he said quietly. This is because of you. Silence shattered the room. For years, Jae-hyun had been obedient, strategic, careful, but today, he chose something else. Integrity. The board moved quickly after that. An emergency vote, temporary suspension of Chairman Kang pending investigation, independent audit authorization, and by the end of the meeting, power shifted. When the final vote was cast, the chairman sat back in his seat as if something inside him had cracked. He looked at Seo-jun, not with hatred now, but with reluctant recognition. You were never weak, he said. Seo-jun held his gaze. No, he agreed softly. I was never weak. Outside the boardroom, reporters were already gathering. Rumors spread fast in conglomerate circles. But Jae-hyun ignored them all. Instead, he turned to Seo-jun. The hallway felt strangely quiet compared to the battlefield they'd just left. You didn't have to expose everything today, Jae-hyun said. Seo-jun looked at him carefully. You needed leverage. Jae-hyun shook his head. I needed honesty. That stopped him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jae-hyun's voice softened. When I married you, I thought I was gaining a liability. A faint smile touched Seo-jun's lips. I remember. I was wrong. Jae-hyun stepped closer. I've never been more wrong in my life. The vulnerability in his tone was real. Not political, not strategic, just a man standing before his husband. I don't care that you were Astra, Jae-hyun said quietly. I care that you thought you had to be alone. Seo-jun's chest tightened. I've been alone a long time. Not anymore. The words were simple, but absolute. That night, they didn't return to the chairman's estate. They went instead to the small apartment Seo-jun had once rented under his consulting identity. It was modest, clean, unpretentious. Jae-hyun stood in the middle of the living room, taking it in. This is where Astra lived, he said softly. Seo-jun nodded. This is where I could think. Jae-hyun turned to him. And now, Seo-jun hesitated, then answered honestly. Now I don't want to think alone anymore. The confession was quiet, but it meant everything. Jae-hyun crossed the room in 2 steps. And pulled him close. No hesitation, no pride, just warmth. You're not my secret weapon, Jae-hyun murmured against his hair. You're my partner. Seo-jun closed his eyes. For the first time since childhood, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Not because the world knew who he was, but because the one person who mattered did. Outside, the storm of media and corporate scandal brewed. Investigations would begin, power would shift, enemies would rise, but inside that small apartment, none of it mattered. For years, Seo-jun had operated from the shadows. Guiding, fixing, saving, invisible. Now, he chose something different. To stand beside someone, not behind them, and in that choice, the mask finally fell, not because it was ripped away, but because he no longer needed it. Epilogue. The throne beside him. 6 months later, Hanseong Group stood taller than it had in a decade. The scandal that once threatened to fracture the conglomerate had instead purified it. The internal audit exposed Chairman Kang's offshore manipulations, and though he was not imprisoned, he was forced into permanent retirement. The media called it a quiet fall. Investors called it necessary. The board called it overdue. But within the towering glass headquarters of Hanseong Group, there was a different name whispered in corridors now. Not Kang Jae-hyun, not even the former chairman. They whispered about Astra. They whispered about Lee Seo-jun. The first time Seo-jun walked into the executive lobby openly as himself, employees froze. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even shock, it was something closer to awe. The once dismissed, political marriage spouse, now moved through the building with quiet authority. No dramatic entrances, no flashy statements, just composure. Beside him, Kang Jae-hyun matched his pace. Not ahead, not behind, beside. That image alone changed everything. Inside the boardroom, now restructured, Jae-hyun officially took his seat as chairman. And when the meeting began, he did something unexpected. He did not introduce a vice chairman. He did not announce a new executive. Instead, he said calmly, "I will be appointing an external strategic oversight director. Someone who understands this company's vulnerabilities and its potential." Every director already knew, but protocol required the name. Seo-jun. No one objected, no one dared, because every single person in that room knew the truth. Hanseong Group would not be standing if not for him. Life outside the boardroom shifted too. Seo-jun's family, once ashamed to show him in public, now received invitations to galas and state dinners. His father, who once called him disappointing, avoided eye contact at first. Until one evening, after a formal dinner, he approached Seo-jun quietly. "I misjudged you," the older man said. Seo-jun studied him for a long moment, then replied gently, "You never tried to know me. It wasn't cruel, just honest." His father lowered his head. For the first time in Seo-jun's life, the power dynamic had reversed. But Seo-jun did not gloat. He simply chose distance. Some bridges were not meant to be rebuilt. At home, things were softer. The Kang estate no longer felt suffocating. Chairman Kang's absence removed a tension that had lingered in every hallway. Jae-hyun moved his office to a smaller study. Seo-jun redesigned the library. They argued over trivial things, curtain colors, dining menus, which art pieces to keep. They laughed more. One night, long after midnight, Seo-jun found Jae-hyun asleep on the couch in his study, financial reports scattered across his chest. For a moment, he simply watched him. This man who had once viewed him as leverage. This man who now trusted him without hesitation. Carefully, Seo-jun removed the papers. Jae-hyun stirred awake. "You're staring," he murmured sleepily. Seo-jun didn't deny it. "You look less terrifying like this." A quiet huff of laughter. "Good." Jae-hyun reached for him lazily, pulling him down onto the couch. "You know," he said against Seo-jun's shoulder, "the media keeps calling you the hidden king." Seo-jun rolled his eyes lightly. "I don't want a throne." Jae-hyun tilted his head to look at him. "Good." His voice softened. "Because I don't want you behind me." Seo-jun's fingers brushed against Jae-hyun's collar. "Then where?" Jae-hyun didn't hesitate. "Beside me, always." The first annual shareholders meeting under the new leadership drew record attendance. Cameras flashed. Reporters speculated. Investors analyzed every gesture. Jae-hyun delivered his speech with confidence, outlining ethical reforms, global expansion strategies, technological pivots. Then, unexpectedly, he paused. "There is someone," he said, "whose guidance shaped much of this vision long before I took this seat." The audience murmured. Seo-jun, seated in the front row, felt a flicker of irritation. He hadn't approved this. Jae-hyun continued anyway. "Hanseong Group's strength has never come from one man at the top." His gaze shifted, directly to Seo-jun. "It comes from those willing to think beyond pride." The message was subtle, but clear. A round of applause followed. Not explosive, not dramatic, but steady, respectful. And in that moment, Seo-jun realized something unexpected. He wasn't invisible anymore, but he wasn't exposed either. He was acknowledged, on his terms. Weeks later, they stood on the rooftop terrace of Hanseong Tower. The city stretched endlessly below, lights flickering like constellations. Jae-hyun leaned against the railing. "When we first married," he said quietly, "I thought I was doing you a favor by not divorcing you." Seo-jun arched a brow. "That was generous of you." A faint smirk. "I was an idiot." "Yes." Jae-hyun laughed softly, then grew serious. "I don't regret the arrangement anymore." The wind shifted, cool against their skin. "I regret that it wasn't my choice at first," he continued. "Because now, I would choose you." There was no audience, no boardroom, no strategy, just honesty. Seo-jun stepped closer. "You are choosing me," he said quietly. "Every day." Jae-hyun reached for his hand. Interlocked their fingers. "In you." Seo-jun looked out over the city he had quietly influenced from shadows for years. For once, he wasn't calculating. Wasn't anticipating collapse. Wasn't preparing for betrayal. He was simply standing there. With someone. "I'm not your advisor anymore," Seo-jun said softly. Jae-hyun's thumb brushed over his knuckles. No. Seo-jun turned to him fully. I'm your equal. A pause. Then Jae-hyun smiled. Not sharp, not corporate. Just real. I know. Months turned into a year. Hanseong Group's profits rose steadily. Transparency policies became industry benchmarks. And in quiet corporate circles, a new legend formed. They no longer whispered about the weak son sold into marriage. They spoke about the strategist who reshaped a dynasty. About the chairman who chose partnership over pride. About a marriage that began as transaction. And became something unshakable. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the estate windows, Seo-jun found himself in the kitchen, attempting, unsuccessfully, to cook. Jae-hyun walked in, loosened tie hanging around his neck. You're burning it, he observed calmly. Seo-jun didn't look up. I am experimenting with fire. Jae-hyun stepped behind him, guiding his hand gently. Lower the heat. Their reflections in the glass showed something neither of them had expected a year ago. Domestic ease, warmth, partnership, the useless sun, the cold air. Neither title fit anymore. Seo-jun leaned back slightly. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. The marriage, yes. Jae-hyun didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned off the stove, set the pan aside, and gently pulled Seo-jun into his arms. No, he said finally. It's the only decision my father made that saved this company. His voice lowered. In me. Seo-jun rested his forehead against Jae-hyun's shoulder. For years, he had been the unseen pillar. The silent architect. The shadow. Now, he was something else entirely. Not a weapon. Not leverage. Not a secret. He was the man standing beside the throne. Not because he was forced there. But because he belonged there. And for the first time in his life, Lee Seo-jun did not need to hide. The end. If you like the story, the throne beside don't forget to like, 6 months later, and hit the bell icon to get notifications for more amazing stories. The scandal that